What did your investigation tell you about just how rigid the hard border actually is in terms of how difficult it is to get an exemption to enter WA?
Hi, Ash. What we discovered through our research is that it's a very arbitrary system and it's incredibly confusing. So we interviewed 17 people who'd had their applications to enter West Australia rejected, many of them numerous times, one woman 7 times, despite the fact that her mother was ill in hospital and she should have met one of these exemption categories under compassionate reasons, wanting to visit a sick relative. And part of the confusion is that there's just, it's clear that there's not enough resources going into this because people don't know where to turn. The West Australian Police are the ones who are managing this system. And when you have a lot of people applying under because of mental health reasons in that category, and there are no health professionals involved, we find that concerning because the police often will reject an application within an hour. People are not clear on what documentation they have to provide, what exact paperwork is needed by the West Australian Police, and it's causing a huge amount of distress when people who are applying to come back to West Australia, they're from the state originally, they want to reunite with their families, and they're being rejected quite a few times, and they're not knowing what they have to do to get their applications approved and be able to enter the state.
So transparency around this exemption process seems to be a real issue.
It is a real issue. There's also no formal review process if your application is rejected. Human Rights Watch, we requested information and also a meeting with the Western Australian Police Minister, Michelle Roberts, and we didn't have the opportunity to do so. The Western Australian Police engaged with us to an extent. They confirmed that it is only police reviewing these applications, not health professionals. They also confirmed the fact that there's no formal review process. So we would really like to engage further with them because we think there needs to desperately be more transparency. We want to know how many people are applying, how many people are being rejected, and why. One concerning part of our research was the fact that people who have employment in West Australia seem to be gaining approval quicker than those who are just citing compassionate or mental health reasons. And to us, that's discriminatory. There's a lot of people who've lost their employment as a result of this pandemic. And if it's a public health emergency, that's why the hard border is there, then it shouldn't matter if you have employment or not as to the risk you pose to Western Australia of bringing the virus in.
The hard border policy has been very popular within Western Australia, although one poll out this week suggests the tide may be turning on that front. What are the alternatives to the hard border in terms of testing and quarantine? What methods are being suggested to go in place of the hard border?
Well, look, what I want to be careful to point out, Ash, is that we're not calling for the hard border to be relaxed. You know, that's for the health professionals to handle, and the Chief Health Officer of West Australia is expected to comment on that sometime in the next week or so. What we're saying is that the process of entering, of getting these applications approved, has to be much fairer, much more compassionate, and much less confusing. So West Australia has done a really brilliant job of keeping out COVID-19, and what we're saying is that they can continue to do that, but they can do it in a way that is fairer and is not so distressing for these residents. Because when we interviewed them, it's just heartbreaking, the stories. You know, a father trapped in Queensland who hasn't seen his children for 10 months, who's been rejected 4 times. A young teacher in New South Wales who's desperate to move back to her home state to see her parents as employment has dried up, and her rejection happened 3 times. And they just don't know who to turn to because they call the COVID hotline, they don't get clear advice. The police often don't give any feedback when they reject your claims. So we think that after 7 months of this, it is time to actually make the process much fairer, because I think if it doesn't, then there will be a lot of people who are beginning to question the hard border and if that is the best way to continue. So we're saying that if that is the aim of the government, to continue to have that border, then you need to allow for more people to enter for compassionate reasons and just really prioritise those cases.